Before the war, the only machine I truly understood was a stamping press in a factory in Essen. I knew its rhythms, its groans, the scent of hot oil on steel. I could tell by the pitch of its whine if a bearing was about to fail, or by the tremor in the floor if the gears weren't meshing right. It was a simple, honest language. Then they gave me a Messerschmitt, a BF 109G, the Gustav, a far more complex machine, but a machine nonetheless, and I learned its language too. The heart of the Gustav, the Daimler-Benz engine, was a symphony of controlled violence. I could feel it through the stick in my hand, through the rudder pedals at my feet. It was an extension of my own body. Up there at 5,000 meters, the world below became an abstraction. The smoke, the fire, the lines of tiny tanks, it was like a vast, broken clockwork on the map table back at the airfield. My job was methodical. Find the flaw in the enemy's formation, the loose cog, and remove it. Protect our Stukas, clear the sky for the Panzers. It was a job, a grim, necessary job to stop the red tide that threatened to wash over everything, to stop the bombers that were turning cities like mine into rubble and ash. In the sky, you could believe in that. You could believe you were a surgeon, not a butcher. July 1943. The air over Kursk was thick enough to chew. It was a stew of dust from the planes, smoke from 1,000 burning tanks, and the exhaust of countless engines. We were part of Jagdschwader 52, the best of the best, and every day we flew into that cauldron. My Staffel, the 9th, had a bond forged in fire. We didn't speak of home much. We spoke of engine performance, of the way the Lavochkins could turn on a Pfennig, of the damned Sturmovix that were built like flying tractors and refused to die. Loyalty wasn't to a flag or a man in Berlin anymore. It was to the pilot on your wing, to the voice crackling in your headset. The morning of the flight, my Gustav felt agitated. During the run-up, I heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible vibration through the fuselage, a slight dissonance in the engine's roar that no one else would notice. A mechanic from Essen hears things. It was like a tooth that ached only when you thought about it. I mentioned it to my chief, a good man named Sergeant Becker. He checked the magnetos, the fuel lines, found nothing. "She's just eager, Klaus," he'd said, clapping me on the shoulder. But I knew the language of machines. Eagerness sounds different from strain. We climbed into the hazy morning sun, 16 of us, a swarm of gray hornets rising to meet the storm. Below us, Operation Citadel was in full fury. It wasn't a battle. It was a world tearing itself apart. I could see the flashes of artillery like heat lightning rippling across the steppe, the black plumes of dying panzers and T-34s marking a front line that was more of a festering wound than a line. Our target was a formation of P-2 bombers escorted by yaks. Simple enough. The radio crackled to life. Indianer, hostiles, 10 o'clock high, and then the world dissolved into chaos. The sky, once vast and open, became a cramped, three-dimensional knife fight. Gray fuselages and red stars flashed in my periphery. Tracers, like angry red wasps, zipped past my canopy. Instinct and training took over. I became part of the machine. A turn, a climb, a burst from the cannons. A yak spiraled down, trailing a banner of black smoke. There was no elation, only a cold, methodical satisfaction, one less cog in their machine. I was lining up on a bomber, my sights steady on its right engine, when my own machine screamed. It wasn't a sound from the engine. It was the sound of tearing metal. A percussive, deafening series of thuds, like a giant hammering on the airframe right behind my head. Thump, 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 asterisk, 20mm cannon shells. The cockpit filled with the acrid smell of cordite and something else, something sweet and hot. Glycol, the engine's lifeblood. The stick went limp in my hand for a split second, then the plane bucked like a dying horse. The symphony of the DB-605 devolved into a choking, grinding cacophony. The vibration I'd felt on the ground was now a bone-jarring seizure. Oil splattered across my windscreen, instantly blinding me. A fire warning light flashed red on the panel, a frantic, pulsing eye in the growing smoke. The machine was dying. It was telling me its final, agonizing secrets. There was no thought, only action. Kill the fuel lines, pop the canopy. The roar of the wind was a physical blow, ripping the air from my lungs. The world was a spinning, nauseating blur of green and brown. I was no longer a pilot. I was just cargo in a falling coffin. I pushed myself up and out, tumbling into the violent air. The ripcord. I pulled it, praying the silk hadn't been shredded. The jolt of the parachute opening felt like it would tear my arms from their sockets. And then silence. A profound, terrifying silence, broken only by the whistling of the wind in my chute's rigging. I watched my Gustav, my beautiful broken machine, spiral down and vanish into a distant stand of trees, followed moments later by a dull crump and a blossom of black smoke. For the first time, I looked down not at a map but at the earth itself, the real earth. It was rushing up to meet me. I was falling into the heart of the broken clockwork. I hit the ground hard, crashing through the branches of a pine tree that tore at my flight suit and skin, but saved my life. I lay there for a minute, maybe an hour, my mind a blank slate of shock. The smell was the first thing that brought me back, not oil or cordite but damp soil, pine needles, and decay. The sounds were alien too, not engines but the chirping of a bird, the rustle of leaves. I was a factory worker from Essen. I knew the sound of 1,000 men and machines. This quiet wilderness was more terrifying than any dogfight. Pain lanced up my leg, a bad sprain, maybe a break. My flight gear was heavy, conspicuous. I stripped off what I could, keeping only my pistol, a knife, and my wits. I was deep behind their lines. Every shadow could hold a Russian patrol. Every snapped twig could be a death sentence. The war, which had been a distant, high-altitude affair, was now intimately, terrifyingly close. I was no longer the hunter. I was the prey. For 3 days, I lived like an animal. I moved at night, guided by the dull, constant glow of the front to the west. Thirst was a fire in my throat. Hunger was a gnawing beast in my gut. I ate berries I couldn't name, hoping they weren't poison. I drank from muddy streams, tasting the iron of the earth. The world of methodical air combat, of clean kills and squadron camaraderie, was a distant dream. This was the reality. This was the war the infantry knew. On the second day I stumbled upon a clearing. A Soviet T-34 sat askew, its turret blown clean off, a gaping, blackened hole where men had once been. A few meters away lay the body of a young tanker, his face turned to the sky, his uniform crawling with insects. He couldn't have been older than 18. From the sky he was just part of a tank, a target. Here on the ground he was a boy, a dead boy, far from his home. I felt a sickness rise in my throat that had nothing to do with hunger. We were all just cogs being fed into the same grinding gears. That night I heard them, voices, Russian, a patrol moving carelessly through the woods, their laughter echoing in the darkness. I flattened myself in a ditch, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I was sure they could hear it. I pulled my pistol, the cold steel a small, pathetic comfort. The smell of their cheap tobacco washed over me as they passed, so close I could have reached out and touched a boot. They moved on, their voices fading. I lay there for a long time, shaking, the sweat on my palms making the pistol grip slick. The fear was a physical thing, a shard of ice in my gut. It was the fear of a machine on the verge of catastrophic failure, knowing that the stress was too great, that the metal was about to shear. By the third day, I was failing. My leg was swollen, my mind delirious with hunger and fatigue. I was leaning against a tree, watching the sun rise, resigned to my fate when I saw them. 2 figures in German camouflage, moving slowly, methodically through the trees. My first thought was that it was a trick of the mind. I raised my pistol, my hand trembling. One of them saw me. He raised his rifle. We stared at each other across 50 meters of forest, 2 ghosts in a forgotten part of the war. Deutsch, he whispered, his voice hoarse. German, I couldn't speak. I just nodded, lowering the pistol. The strength went out of me all at once, and I collapsed against the tree. They were a forward recon unit, as surprised to see me as I was to see them. They gave me water from a canteen, a piece of hard bread that tasted like the finest meal of my life. They helped me walk, half carrying me back towards the sound of the guns, back towards the machine. When I finally returned to my squadron, they thought I was a ghost. They had seen me go down. They had marked me as killed in action. But I was not the same man who had taken off 3 days before. I had fallen from the sky and walked on the brutal earth. I had seen the face of the boy by the broken tank, smelled the forest, tasted the fear of the hunted. I still flew, I still fought, it was my job, but the sky was no longer a sanctuary. It was just a different floor in the same slaughterhouse. I never again felt that clean, professional distance. Every time I looked down at the smoke and fire, I saw the faces, the bodies, the mud. I understood that the great machine of the Reich, the one we were all cogs in, was not just strained, it was failing. I could hear it in the dissonant roar of the cannons, feel it in the shuddering of the ground. And I feared, with a cold certainty honed on the factory floor, that it was breaking apart beyond any hope of repair. These memories are heavy, but they must be shared. Subscribe to ensure these stories are never forgotten.